We started the NLA in 2005. Of course, 2005 was a period when Ken Livingstone was mayor and the Olympics were announced the day before NLA actually opened. And you, Ricky, were really involved with the architecture and urbanism unit with Ken Livingstone, led by Richard Rodgers. But we first met in 26 Kramer Street, where you were running the 9H Gallery. I started Blueprint magazine with Diane Sujic and Simon Eston. David Chipperfield was in the office as well, and a whole galaxy of people who then went on to become leaders in the sort of design and environmental field. So just tell me quickly how the 9H Gallery then transformed into the Architecture Foundation, but then you were at the Architecture Foundation central to Tony Blair's strategy for having an elected mayor for London.
The 9H Gallery and that historic, wonderful moment where we came to wherever you found a space, Peter, don't forget that. You were the one who started it with Word Search and Blueprint, and then David Chipperfield, who then had, I think, 4 people, didn't need an extra space, so I ended up there doing the gallery. Anyway, that was sort of mid-80s, and fast forward to the 90s, we created the Architecture Foundation, which, yes, I guess created a space for public debate around the environment and mainly around the politics of London, which was absent because of Mrs. Thatcher having abolished the GLC. So that led the foundation becoming, I guess, a platform where people like Tony Blair, but many others, John Gummer, I have to say, from the other side, did come and speak, and issues about public space, design. Stephen Norris, I remember, was one of the key players at the time. So when the whole GLA and Ken Livingstone was elected in 2000, there was a sort of context of people involved in that discussion, and I was very much a junior member of that group.
But you'd also been working with Richard Rodgers on the Urban Task Force before joining him at the GLA.
That's right. So the Labour government of Blair and John Prescott came in 97, right? And pretty soon after that, John Prescott, and it was his baby, commissioned Richard Rodgers to look at this horrific problem then, as it was considered, rightly so, of declining populations in urban centres everywhere. In London, it had been dropping, it was beginning to pick up, Manchester, Liverpool, etc., 30% drop. So the towards an urban renaissance, as it was then called, the report, was at the end of the 90s. And when the mayoral position was created for London and Ken Livingstone was appointed, it was sort of very easy for him to say, there's a national policy about intensifying urban growth. There's a group of people who care about this, and London is at the center of it. And therefore, he asked Richard Rodgers to be his chief advisor. And I joined in as one of the sort of junior members of that team. I guess that's already 2001, 2002. And Nikki Gavron was the key link, I now remember as we're speaking. She was the one who sort of knocked on the door and said, with her early interest in environment, sustainability, etc., why don't you, join the team? And that's how it's happened. I have to say, this was, for me, I had just about arrived at the London School of Economics. So my day job was there, and I wasn't full-time at the GLA.
Because it was a pretty small team initially, wasn't it? And then it sort of transformed into Design for London and grew as the number of people involved. But a lot of the work you were involved with was public space, wasn't it? And that was really the first real debate about improving quality of public space in London.
Well, as ever, in many things we've all done, you have too, we copied Barcelona, right? Because, Barcelona at that point had already established its reputation as having, under a city architect, Oriol Bohigas, who then, he got some very talented young people, and he called them the Golden Pens. And the Golden Pens from Barcelona were basically the team that drew up the master plan, the vision, which then became part of their Olympics, but also much more. So when Richard arrived, I think there were 3 people at that point. And the notion was to actually just call it a small unit, which advised one person, the mayor. So Richard was the advisor to Ken, the chief advisor. And then the small group called Architecture and Urbanism Unit was created, which, as you say, but quite some time later became Design for London, then a bigger thing. And the relationship shifted from being directly advisory to Ken to being part of the London Development Agency. So I think that that was maybe a natural evolution, but it was I have to say, quite a big shift in terms of that very, very special connection of those early days, which influenced the London Plan. If you look at the first editions of Ken Livingstone's 2004 London Plan, there's an introductory note by Richard Rodgers, obviously one by Ken. So that sort of says something about the direction of travel.
The whole idea, which actually still holds good with Sadiq Khan, although albeit the perimeter of growth is the green belt with him rather than, let's say, the GLA or area, that we build more densely, that development for London is generated within the area of London. That still holds good 20 years later, doesn't it?
There's a wonderful diagram done by Andrew, I've forgotten his surname, wonderful Andrew, who was working for Richard Rodgers at the time, which was known as the fried egg diagram, which was showing the different density. So the darker the color, the more dense it was with the connections. It was sort of an abstract notion. If you take that diagram from it was done for the Urban Task Force report, so 97, 98, as we were saying before, and you look at the basic principles behind the first London Plan 2004, then Boris Johnson's update in 2011, and the most recent one, which is having a few little docking problems at the moment, but another 8 years on, you're absolutely right. Those principles of retaining the greenbelt, don't grow out, intensify certain areas as long as they are well connected by public transport, I think flow through all 3. You're absolutely right. But the origins of that discussion come from the debates in European cities of the benefits of densification and compact city, and the environmental arguments in favor of public transport.
You did some quite important research at LSE, didn't you? I can't remember what year that was, looking at density, and that was the time when it was revealed that Knightsbridge is the densest part of London, yeah. I think, and people actually were quite happy living in dense environments as long as they had access to green and open space.
Well, there were a number of studies, and one we actually did at the LSE called Density and Neighborhoods in London. I think it was in 2001 and 2, that sort of time, where we did exactly what you just said, which is we identified 5 or 6 different neighborhoods, some of which you would have thought were, leafy, low density, but actually when you look at parts of Brixton, parts of inner East London, and certainly parts of Notting Hill, that sort of area, Earl's Court, these are seriously dense neighborhoods, and of course not high rise, just compact, perimeter block type housing in some cases with communal gardens, not all. And we also did a number of questionnaires, and I remember presenting this, in fact, to number 10. Ed Miliband was, if I'm not wrong, the environment minister at that time. And what we found from the surveys, from the questions, to not just the, let's call it the mapping, is that people made trade-offs, and they were happy to live in denser areas than they would normally like, as long as they had, as you summarized, proximity to a park or an open space like the river. So that accounts for many of these things, and that that typology, frankly, I don't think we've been able to repeat anywhere in London, despite all the developments. maybe the closest could be even the Olympic Village, but we're nowhere near Notting Hill in quality.
Tell me then how you did get involved with the Olympics, because you stopped really working with the architecture and urban unit in, I think, 2006, when Peter Bishop came in with design for London.
That's
But
right.
by then you were involved with the Olympics. How did that all happen?
So simply what happened is I got involved with the Venice Biennale in 2006.
Right.
So basically, couldn't breathe, walk, or do anything else for about 2 years, in a good way. And the shift happened towards design for London. I think probably had more teeth, more money, and all that. London in 2005 was awarded the Games, and at that point, it was suggested by Tessa Jowell, in fact, who was, of course, the Secretary of State under the Blair government, that I might move to advising the Olympic Delivery Authority as Chief Advisor on Architecture and Urbanism. So technically, I left the Mayor's office and moved to the ODA, and then very briefly, around 2011 or so, also assisted with, in that capacity, with what was then the Olympic Park Legacy Company, the predecessor of the LLDC today. So yeah, there was a sort of obviously shift. So from Ken worked with Boris.
Were you involved with signing up Foreign Office architects and Zaha Hadid for the Olympic Park?
Yes. So with the London Development Agency, and the key figure there was Tony Winterbottom, who was the chief executive or whatever his role was. I can't remember. London made a very interesting decision that, in anticipation of possibly winning the Games, they actually ran the competition for the Aquatic Centre before London was appointed the Games. And it was a very clever move. It was partly politics. We're serious. We're going to build these things because London needs it. So that was a competition run by the LDA. Richard Rodgers was the chair. I was on the jury for that, and I think participated in helping with the brief, but it was run by the LDA and all the sort of authorities that knew about swimming. And that's the one that Zaha won, you rightly say. And then the master plan for the Olympic site was developed once London had been awarded the game, but of course the site had already been selected. And again, the LDA was the sort of key driver. But I do remember working with a number of people very much still around today on the brief, the shortlisting, and then being part of the selection that had Foreign Office architects together with Edor and Allies and Morrison. I think they were already part of the team. And of course, configurations have changed, names have changed, companies have come and go. But there's no doubt that the sinuous shapes of Foreign Office, with all the big pedestrian walkways flowing from the Lee Valley down towards Stratford, along on either side of the canals, was very much one of the exciting spatial ideas that came out of it, as was the idea that some of the venues should be permanent because London needed them, and we know which ones those are, and many of the others should be temporary. So that was inbuilt into the brief and then into their scheme.
Your influence and, let's say, your love of Barcelona is very strong in the Olympic Village, isn't it? Because there you have this courtyard housing, perhaps a vague connection with the Serra grid, but actually providing something which is very different to your standard London housing offering.
Yes, that's true. But if one also has to remind ourselves of something that, even though those of us who've been very close to this project sometimes forget, in 2002, a massive planning permission for something called Stratford City, which was developed by then Chelsfield, Stuart Lipton, Nigel Hugel, and many others, I guess Elia Bernard and others were involved, received planning for a massive shopping center, which is of course there, and what would have been a housing development, and that was Fletcher Priest was mainly involved with Arup, and Adrian Goeze of West State were the landscape architects. And if you remember those scheme, Peter, I mean, there's a big yellow book called Stratford City, and I'm pretty sure it was 2002.
Yeah, I produced it.
Okay, you produced and I wrote the introduction. So there we go, just in case we think we're not implicated. No, but it's very important because what you've just described or ascribed to, say, the Barcelona lovers like me as being responsible for that block was already there in that plan. So in fact, what happened when London won the games, in a very London way, there was this piggybacking of private sector having the nose to go there and get planning permission for, you know, a pretty major second Canary Wharf type center with far too much car parking and everything else. And then the government comes along, having won the games and saying, let's take this plan and build on it, because that's already, so in fact, that central spine, which is now a landscaped park, which goes through the village, let's say east-west, more or less, was in Adrian Goeze's plan a big water park, linear park, with the same housing typology on each side. So it's as ever mixed, and certainly it wasn't my influence.
I can't remember what year it was. I can remember I had a meeting with Andy Altman, and he was late for the meeting. I was sitting there waiting, and he came rushed back in, and he said, "Oh, I've just had a meeting with Boris," and he said, "We don't want any more of this European stuff of flats and squares in the middle of blocks. You know, I want to get back to something which is much more." London streets, that's what we need.
That's where I think the term the London vernacular came.
That's it, and you see it all in Chobham Manor now, really much lower street-based architecture.
Well, I mean, if you take the beginning of the second phase post the Olympic Village, both the Athletes Village, in the area between the Athletes Village and the Velodrome, that's exactly what Boris had in mind, and that's what Andy, when he was the chief executive of the OPLC, so that would have been 2011-ish, you know, coming when he arrived. That's when those sort of plans were drawn up, and you know, there was been quite a lot of criticism. Why didn't you keep the density of the first part? Well, you've just told us why.
So, I mean, if we talk about other developments that were happening as a part of the urban renaissance in London, was I remember there was City East, which I'm pretty sure you were involved with the idea that the Royal Docks and the surrounding areas should be seen as almost a new town, and certainly a development corporation which would deliver change. Now we hear that maybe City Hall will be moving into the Royal Docks. Stuart Lipton had a go. Kojima had a go at Silvertown. Nothing happened there. Why do you think it's taken so long? Since, you know, the Olympics happened really quickly, maybe concentrated 30 years of development into 5 or 6 years probably, but the areas like the Royals have taken a long time to get going. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there are probably at least two, if not more, reasons. And one, if you overlay part of central London, any part of central London, on that part of the dock area, starting at the Royal Docks, right? Very simply, you get an extraordinary clarity about, in the same area in central London, you would have something like, I think it's 26 tube stations, right? In whatever it is, call it 8 kilometers. And you would have a population density or build density of X. And that X will be 20, 30, 40 times higher than it's been historically for obvious reasons, because it was a dock and empty area. So the absence of connection and connectivity and the absence of actual density, I think, has been part of the reason it's taken so long. You know, in the end, the Olympic site had Stratford as an classic London, well-connected town center with its own life and idiosyncrasies, with people there. They sort of, there's an identifiable place right on the fringes of it. That's not the case as you go east on the Royal Docks. Now, I remember, you've just reminded me of City East as an initiative that Richard Rodgers under Ken Livingstone, so going back just a little bit in time, but back to sort of the 2000, well, when you started with NLA, roughly then, there was this group, Thames Gateway something, or which Richard chaired. Will Alsop was part of it. Francine Hubin from Mécanu was involved, and many other really talented people. And the first thing she did is that she came with a map of Amsterdam, overlaid it onto a map on the wall of the Royal Docks, and the whole of Amsterdam fits between the Royal Docks and Barking. Yeah. I'm maybe a little bit wrong, but not that wrong. So I guess the same point applies about one of the reasons that it is taking long, and I'm not sure whether just moving the GLA headquarters there will do the trick.
Well, it's very interesting. Of course, Francine is now working on, or has been working on, Thamesmead, which had very much similar sorts of problems of too much space, too much distance, bad communications.
With one big difference, which is when Crossrail happens, Thamesmead will not be disconnected.
Yeah.
So that's important. And of course, neither will Silvertown. But despite Thamesmead having a lot of empty, unloved, postmodern, dystopian open space, it has a density. I mean, it's a massive housing project from a particular period. Therefore, you have something to work with. And that's why Peabody bought it. And that's why I think Francine and others have actually done some interesting. So I think it is slightly different from, literally kilometers of emptiness.
But do you think one of the inherent problems of doing that goes back to the London Docklands Development Corporation, which was basically about selling off sites and then allowing the private sector to development without a coherent master plan? So it was really, it was developers who generated activity, but they generated activity in different spots, which actually made a very open and spread sort of city, which doesn't work. It's taken a very long time to work as a coherent piece of city.
Taking what you've just said, and the learning curve of any major urban project, but also of course architectural project, but urban projects even more so, I think, it's wonderful when you have examples of what not to do, right? And we've been saying there's a positive example in the case of Barcelona of intervention from a mayor and much more. I think if we wanted to take two examples of what not to do purely from the urbanistic point of view, right? The combination of Canary Wharf and the Docklands Corporation piecemeal development was certainly, let's call it, an inspiration behind the need for the master plan of the Olympic site to be very clear about a couple of things. One is where the roads and the connections were, and that the whole master plan, the three-dimensional sense of the streets, the squares, and where schools had to be, etc., was locked into the planning permission, which is still ongoing as we speak. So until the LLDC remains, that plan, in a way, has to be sort of stuck to. And that plan comes from Allies and Morrison, Case Christianse, EDOL, further development of the original Olympic plan with Foreign Office. So I think there's a lot of continuity there, which is really quite interesting.
Let's jump forward to the present day then, when the LSE cities, which of course you set up, now established part of the educational establishment. And do we now, as a result of COVID-19, fear for the urban renaissance, that actually there is quite a lot of debate about whether cities are the petri dishes of viral infection, and do we now look at a less dense environment to the future?
Well, you're making two separate points, and the first I appreciate, and I don't think is necessarily connected to the second, except that I hope that anyone who's been part of a discussion about what makes a city thrive, may have been at LSE cities or not, in a way still has to carry that flag, because my sense, Peter, is that the sort of knee-jerk reaction there's been in the Twitter sphere, and even to a degree in academia and planning, that we're going to go 180 degrees the other way, I still haven't seen the evidence. In fact, today, as we speak, in June, there's a report out from Johns Hopkins University, so not a lightweight institution, which has identified, after studying 900 plus different counties, as they're called, across the United States, that actually there is a negative correlation between density and the spread of the virus, that other factors come in. In fact, interestingly, places that are better connected and are bigger, in other words, that people move from home to work, to places of leisure, to retail, whatever, that's actually been much more responsible, or seems to be, because you can't actually create, just because something's happening, make a causal link, but it's more likely. And density is much less the case. I mean, even in New York, Peter, the densest part of Manhattan is the area on the upper east side and upper west side, near Central Park. Those areas, for a number of reasons, had a much lower infection rate, and certainly a significantly lower death rate than areas of much lower density in the Bronx and in Queens, inhabited mainly by Latino and Black African residents who've been there for many generations. So it's not this blunt instrument that everyone's going to run away from the city is something I'm not yet ready to accept. And I also think that there's a post-COVID discussion, and then there's a post-vaccine discussion. I mean, I know if we're lucky and we have one, and it will take X months, even maybe years, for it to be rolled out, and then we have to produce enough for the whole of the world's population. But once that is in place, a sense of security will affect things. The third thing I would say, just thinking about your question about density and what's happening, think of the three cities in the Far East which experienced this early on and dealt with it very early on. And I'm thinking of Hong Kong, Seoul, and Singapore, and Shanghai to a degree, but I know less about it. The three cities I've just mentioned, which have some of the highest density in the world in sheer number of people living per square kilometer, square mile, whose transport patterns are nearly all dependent on public transport. I mean, Hong Kong, I think it's 85% of the population uses public transport to go to work. And Tokyo, we have the images of people being pushed into trains at subway stations with white gloves and all that. They've dealt with the pandemic better than we have, and better than many other low density cities. So all I'm saying is the jury is out. And I think there's been a bit too simplistic a knee-jerk reaction. What we need to understand are a couple of things. Does proximity and density mean you have better services and access to health? The answer is obviously yes. London could have done much worse than it has. And if we'd started a week earlier, we would have done much, much better. There's no doubt about that. And that, by the way, is part of this Johns Hopkins study, that proximity to medical services means that you can get there more quickly. I think, sorry, that's the main point I wanted to make.
I would agree there is probably not going to be a flight out of the city, or a flight out of the city is not the appropriate response. But I do think that there will be a shift in the way we use a city like London, in that we have clearly, there is, I think, fairly clear evidence in terms of surveys done that we are going to see a shift to more home working. And this is, as a lot of other things, it's accelerating something which was happening already. So even if, for instance, you have people working 1 day a week more at home than they do in an office, that means central areas are going to shift of, that's 20% of activity of people who go and have lunch in restaurants, use local facilities and centre. They're going to be using those in their local areas instead. That will rebalance to a certain extent the economy of London. Not necessarily a bad thing, but actually what one needs to see is some response from the central areas as to how they deal with that, if they're going to remain as what they're central business districts, or even central tourist districts, places of real activity, and which create that buzz that cities have.
I think, London has one advantage, which is part of its metabolism, part of its DNA, that it's been since its birth a multi-centered city. Where you are in Chiswick is as urbane as many other parts of London. So it doesn't have the classic issue that everything is concentrated, say, in the middle, like Milan or many other European cities. And the American model is yet a different one. So I think, just taking your point about, will the outer centers perhaps, or the slightly lower density areas see increased activity because of what you say, more home staying, more home working, and therefore someone like you preferring to have lunch or dinner, or me in Chiswick and me in Camden or whatever, I think probably will happen. But I also, even in our working experience of London, call it 30 years, we've seen this urban metabolism adapt in the most extraordinary way. So I'm actually quite positive that that can happen. Now, I think what was behind your question is, what will the center do to adapt to the absence of? And I think, again, this is where good, strong leadership from government and the boroughs can do something about it. And, if there are going to be a lot of empty pret-a-mangers, maybe that means there's new hope for the high street by doing something else. I don't have an answer, but it's an opportunity.
I think you're absolutely right, because if we go full circle, actually, Ken Livingstone was known as the Zone 1 mayor, wasn't he? And then actually Boris Johnson changed strategies quite dramatically after he realised that most of his votes came from out of London. So he realised that he had to do something to placate those voters, very much in a similar way that he now is having to placate the North, actually. I think there's a really interesting similarity between those two elections. But certainly we found at NLA that it was very difficult to get outer boroughs to engage with us in under Ken, but actually under Boris, they became much more involved in the wider discussion. They didn't feel quite so left out. And so I think this shift of policies that do try to create greater economic growth in outer London, that's a shift that has been happening for the last 20 years, and is also written into the as yet incomplete, as it were, New London Plan, where town centres first is a sort of key part of the debate.
I think the London Plan, with its notion of intensification of outer and inner centres or brownfield sites, etc., has led, say, Barking, Dagenham, etc., to the shift and investment there. Very importantly, the local authorities themselves are taking on some new ventures in terms of investment in housing, very important. But then, controversial as it is, the moving of the three major markets to Barking Riverside, effectively, or that. I mean, that's a dramatic shift, isn't it? Now, today, it probably feels like the heart is being ripped out of the part of London we've loved, where you've had your offices, and how many of us talking to each other now or listening to this will have eaten at St. John's and all that, and probably feel clearly romantic and upset that that's happening. But in terms of a 200-300 year history of London, I think it will be a very interesting shift. And maybe going back to your earlier comments about Royal Docks on the Thames Gateway not working, that may be something quite particular, just having so many jobs out there, which then will maybe change the nature of who wants to live there and bring about a little bit more of an urban culture than is now present or is now absent in much of the housing developments in those parts of the outlying parts of the River Thames.
Yes, but of course it's taken such a long time for us to get around to making decisions which cities like Paris, Rungis, the meat market moved out of the Beltard pavilions 30 years ago, and we were actually thinking about doing the same thing at the time, but our very common law approach to planning doesn't allow that. The meat traders wanted to stay in Smithfield, they didn't want to move, and even for the City of London, it was very hard for them to make any shift.
As a foreigner, as an Italian, you couldn't possibly imagine I might comment on that. So.
No, I'd be very glad if you did, actually.
But it is interesting what you've just said, that yesterday, which was Sunday the 28th of June, Paris elected a mayor for the second time, Anne Hidalgo. She was re-elected with a very reasonable majority, with some of the most ambitious anti-car, pro-environment ideas that you could actually put anywhere. So, I think cities are able to absorb radical concepts. The rapidity or absence of rapidity of change here, you might say, might be a criticism. But Peter, if you think back, a little bit further back when you started in NLA, when you started Blueprint, so we're going back to the mid-'80s, right? Think how London has changed from then, right? I mean, and people who used to visit London and come and see us, let's say from Milan or New York or whatever, it's only taken 15, 20 years for this place to be totally transformed. So yes, you might complain that, things haven't happened as fast as, Smithfield's taken 40 years to move out. But other things have changed very, very dramatically. And I have to say, broadly for the better. I mean, I know it's not a time to be optimistic, but I am.
Well, I'm very, very glad to hear that. And certainly looking back, as you said, to the days when Blueprint occupied 26 Kramer Street, we actually only paid £4 a square foot for that space because the office market was at such a low level that you could get stuff for next to nothing right in the centre of Marylebone. Maybe gentrification is a bad thing, but actually, higher rents do reflect a certain level of economic activity, which can be seen as positive. And but we did stay there for 10 years during the 80s, actually, and it was a very good nursery for us to build up. And it's really fascinating to see how that group of people who were in 26 Kramer Street have gone on to, might say, change the way we think about London. Yourself, obviously, at the LSE, Dejan Sujic, who's gone on to numerous things from the Venice Biennale to Domus to the Design Museum. Tim Marlowe, now also where he went to the Royal Academy, then to Design Museum. Rowan Moore, our, let's say, leading architectural critic at the moment, is another one, and various other people who were operating.
I think you've left out one name.
David.
You've left out one name, and of course, so the French phrase for it is the fil rouge, the red string that connects all of them, and that red string is wearing a pink shirt right now. It's you, Peter. You are the connector of all these individuals and all these institutions and all these organizations And no one listening to this should forget that.
Thank you, Ricky. Very nice of you.